Discussing it with us next is political activist Anthony Rogers-Wright and also conservative writer Jeff Charles. Both welcome to RT International. Thanks for your time. First of all, to you, Anthony, the Norwegian lawmaker who's nominated Black Lives Matter for this called them mostly peaceful. Is that enough to qualify for a prize this prestigious?
I would say so. I mean, I think it's important to remember first and foremost that Black Lives Matter is a movement of individuals working together in principled struggle, but it is not a collective of individuals. And what that means is that, of course, there are some individuals who have escalated and taking matters into their own hands that, some people would criticize, including your other guests. At the same time, I would remind people that it was Gandhi himself who also had some periods in his life when he was most bellicose, when he was in South Africa fighting against Black Africans. And even Dr. King held weapons in his house to protect himself against white supremacy terrorism. So I think that any movement that is 93% peaceful and has had just the impact, as you were stating earlier, around the world, not just in the United States, also in solidarity with all oppressed people around the world, including Palestinian people, this is a most warranted and deserved award for sure.
And Jeff, those figures, 93% peaceful, 7% violent, I guess we'd look at the news coverage, we'd say it was 93% coverage of the violent actions. Is that a risk of overshadowing the global conversation that we've been having in the past year about racial equality that's led to this nomination?
Yeah, I think it has. I mean, I have no problem acknowledging that the vast majority of people who were protesting for Black Lives Matter were in fact peaceful. But the notion that this is anywhere similar to Martin Luther King Jr. having guns in his house to defend himself is a little bit absurd on its face. The thing is, you have a movement where people, whether they represent the movement or not, torched Black businesses. 25 people were killed last summer due to these riots that occurred. And I might understand that point if the Black Lives Matter, their leadership in force came out and condemned the rioting, but you only had a few local chapters who were willing to actually condemn the violence. So as this went on and on and on, you have Black neighborhoods being destroyed, millions and millions of dollars in damage, which affects Black people and will affect them for years to come, just like it happened with the LA riots. I don't see how this organization, at least the national organization, deserves this prize. This prize is intended for organizations that benefit mankind. When you've got people's livelihoods being destroyed and you've got people being killed, it's hard for me to see how that's the case, especially when there's no widespread condemnation among the ranks of Black Lives Matter.
Anthony, Donald Trump's being nominated. His name's been put forward for a second year, obviously not to do with the impeachment and the claims of incitement on the Capitol earlier this month. This is to do with Israel and bringing them closer together with the UAE. But presumably you wouldn't begrudge him this nomination.
Yes, I mean, which is why it's very interesting to even hear conservatives like your guest try to juxtapose the Black Lives Matter movement with the white supremacy insurrection that took place on January 6th, which, of course, was incited by former president, I'm happy to say, Donald Trump. And also, you know, this idea that Martin Luther King was some indigent, singing Kumbaya person waiting to get beaten up is just plain feckless. Dr. King himself did say that people in places like Detroit and Watts and Newark use strategic violence because we're talking about property damage, not loss of life. And never have you seen Black Lives Matter take part in an insurrection where they were trying to stop the democratic process in a country that still oppresses them more than the pubescent volatility of white supremacy that we saw on January 6th. The fact that Donald Trump has even been considered for a Nobel Peace Prize just goes to show you the differences in standards for Black and white people in this country and, quite frankly, throughout the world.
Jeff, if you put a pin in the list of anybody who's won the Nobel Peace Prize over the last 50 years, just about all of them have had a pretty rocky road to get there, but then we look at it all through the prism of history. With nominating Black Lives Matter, it's not an individual or a couple of individuals that are being nominated here. It's the global conversation that we're now having, unprecedented, I would say, in my lifetime, about racial inequality in all sorts of countries. Presumably, that is what carries the weight of this nomination.
You know, I liken it to what a lot of people did during the riots out here. A lot of our Democratic politicians. The riots happened, the peaceful protests happened, and what change has actually happened? Nothing. They got some murals painted. They got Black Lives Matter written on certain streets. So yeah, I'm all for conversation, but just like in the past, how this always goes is there's a lot of conversation, a lot of talking, and no actual action. So to me, I mean, just having a conversation isn't enough to win a Nobel Peace Prize. There should actually be something good that happens. I mean, you have Black Lives Matter talking about defunding the police, even though 82% of Black Americans disagree with that. And you know what? Defunding the police and having fewer police officers is going to disproportionately affect Black people. So to me, saying that Black Lives Matter, you're not really showing that when you are supporting the destruction of Black businesses, the destruction of Black lives, and you're making Black people less safe. And unlike a lot of people, like the other person that you have on this show here, I can condemn the riots at the U.S. Capitol. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of Republicans did condemn that violence. And yet you don't see a whole lot of that. We didn't see a whole lot of that this past summer during the riots that were happening with Antifa and Black Lives Matter.
Anthony, the core message of BLM is ending police violence against Black Americans. Just quickly, do you expect the situation to change now that there's someone else in the White House?
I mean, we have already seen those changes. Even before this president was sworn in, we saw the introduction of the Breathe Act by Representatives Rashida Tlaib and Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts. We have seen a slew of executive actions having to do with racial justice by this president. So to say that it's just a hashtag and just a saying and that there hasn't been any action, we've seen massive police reforms and divestment in cities like New York, in cities like Los Angeles, Minneapolis at one point calling for changing the entire police structure. In San Francisco, police officers are no longer allowed to go on the scene for mental health cases. And all across the country, we are seeing a call for police to have a more structured analysis in how they deal with transgender people. So this idea that there hasn't been action is simply unfounded. What we haven't seen action is in the domestic terrorist threat in the United States from white supremacy terrorists who show up to state buildings with their guns out, but not their masks. And we would love to hear more conservatives also going after Congress people who are trying to bring guns into the people's house and threatening other members of Congress with their white supremacist and QAnon views. Again, Black Lives Matter movement is about liberation, it is about peace, and it is about the real threats to Black people, which include a capitalist state and white supremacist police officers.
Jeff, do you think that in America, because this topic does divide the country so much, they're in danger of interpreting this potential nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize as being a political jibe against domestic politics, rather than, as the Norwegian politician points out, it's more to do with the fight for justice, not who individually is proposing it?
Yeah, I think the fight for justice is laudable. I think that there is an issue with police brutality, and I think that something should be done about it. I mean, Anthony had mentioned the slew of executive orders that Biden has listed. You know who he kind of left out? I mean, he named Asian Americans by name, illegal immigrants by name. He didn't say anything about us, though, did he? And when it comes to all these actions that people are calling for, where are the laws in place to hold police officers accountable when they overstep their boundaries? That's what's going to get them to stop. Not all this nice stuff about, oh, well, if it's mental health, we'll send somebody else. No, I mean, whatever. I mean, you have to actually hold these people accountable, and nobody is really trying to do that. So to me, it's just window dressing. It doesn't actually mean a whole heck of a lot. And I want to get to a point to where both conservatives and liberals can actually discuss actual solutions. When it comes to white supremacists, you're not going to have a whole lot of people on the right who agree with it. Like I said, the people at the Capitol were roundly condemned by the right, unlike what we saw with the riots from Black Lives Matter last year. So I think we need to get to a place where we can actually have an honest conversation about this, rather than just pushing for a certain agenda or trying to just call out the other side or what have you.
Just quickly, Anthony,
I agree with that. I think you just saw a beautiful moment. I would love to have these conversations with our conservative friends to actually hold police officers accountable, to rid things like qualified immunity. And I think your guess is absolutely right. I mean, we have to have these difficult conversations. We have to be willing to listen to each other and not talk past each other. And I think that Black Lives Matter in many ways have started and maintained that conversation.
OK, I'm glad you're both on the same page. Just the rest of the country to go then, gentlemen, I suppose. All right, well, that's your task for 2021. Anthony Rogers-Wright, Jeff Charles, thanks very much for joining us.